Nancy Elson, a member of our congregation. Nancy Elson is an advanced practice nurse, which is a nurse practitioner. She has an MSN, Master of Science in Nursing, and Bachelor of Science of Nursing from the University of Pennsylvania, and has been an advanced practice nurse, family nurse practitioner for 36 years. She initially graduated from Lankenau Hospital School of Nursing. As of May 13th, 2014, next week, I guess, she will have been a nurse for 43 years. Quite remarkable for someone only 45 years old. In 2005, she completed a postmaster's degree at Rutgers University and is now a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner. She has a private practice and provides counseling for individuals and couples who are facing various challenges: illness, big life decisions, loss, and grief, and who want to make healthy lifestyle changes. Nancy's long career has included a variety of roles as a professional nurse and nurse practitioner, school nurse, flight nurse on C-141 aircraft in the U.S. Air Force Reserves for 8 years. First adolescent nurse practitioner at Children's Hospital in Philadelphia. There's a lot more, too. Constituent League Coordinator for the National League of Nursing, faculty at many universities, including Penn, Fairleigh Dickinson University, she's the creator of the wellness models for care of students at Fairleigh Dickinson University, Montclair State University, and William Patterson State University. Group facilitator for cancer survivors at Gilda's Club, and community education and outreach coordinator at Holy Name Medical Center for the last 10 years. Currently, she works full-time at New Jersey Community Care Center. Just go past Mule Road, take your first right. It's the first building on your left. Volunteer work is an important part of Nancy's life. For 17 years, she volunteered for the New Jersey State Nurses Association, facilitating a support group for nurses who had become impaired because of addiction or mental health challenges. She is an active Rotarian, having served as the president of the Rotary Club of Teaneck and an assistant district governor for District 7490 of Rotary International. She is now a proud member of the Rotary Club of Toms River. Nancy is an active new board member right here at UUOCC, serving on the board, membership, and worship committee, and chair of the Public Relations Committee. Her goal is to focus on building that committee to work to end the best kept secret in Ocean County, UUOCC. Nancy's favorite and most important role is being Greg's mom. Her almost 23-year-old son graduated from Fordham University at Lincoln Center last May. He lives in Manhattan and is a working actor. Nancy lived in Teaneck for 21 years. She moved to Holiday Heights in Toms River full-time last November to enjoy a lifelong dream of living near the ocean. She plans to indulge her inner beach bum a great deal more. So here's the inner beach bum and Nancy Elson.
It's about time. Yeah, I don't know when I'm going to get around to that beach bum thing. Seemed like that's exactly what I was going to do, but there's a few more things yet to be done as well. Well, thank you for having this opportunity to talk about nurses today. May 6th to the 14th is National Nurses Week, and the theme this year is Nurses Leading the Way. Each year, this is a time to celebrate the profession of nursing and to honor nurses for their professional work. This annual week of recognition was chosen as Florence Nightingale's birthday was May 12th in 1820. It is a rumor that we went to nursing school together, and I want to put that to rest. The idea for doing a sermon on nurses and nursing came to me when I was at Murray Grove for the first time. There, up on the wall in that large social hall, were a couple of posters with names of famous Unitarian Universalists. In reality, most of them were, back in the day, either Unitarians or Universalists. You can imagine my surprise to see that both Florence Nightingale and Clara Barton, two superstars in the history of my profession, were both from the faith tradition of my choice. When you learn a bit more about each of them, it is not surprising that these two incredible women and nurses are a part of the people who give our faith tradition a rich and powerful history. The surprise was that I wasn't even aware of this, and I'd studied their careers. The second reason for doing a sermon about a profession was as a way to share my love of the work of nursing with all of you. For most non-nurses, your awareness of my profession may be limited to media portrayals. You know, we have Hot Lips Hooligan, and hopefully good and occasionally bad personal experiences in receiving or observing care given by a colleague of mine. One of the saddest moments in the last year for me, other than Pat's actual death, was hearing that the congregation felt that if they weren't at the hospital with her, she wouldn't get the care that she needed. And it broke my heart. And perhaps the most important reason to share a topic on my profession is that it may inspire many of you to do a sermon reflecting on your work and your profession. I love learning how people choose their path of work and why. Exploring how we do what we do for a living shapes who we are as a person. That's interesting. Equally interesting is how our personal history, who we are and who we become over a lifetime, informs and on a good day inspires our work. The intersection of how each of us use all of this intellect, passion, and a diverse skill set in our community here at UUOCC is important. What we can offer our faith community to the larger community of Ocean County from our collective skill set is what will lead to the renewed success, joy, and growth of this congregation. So I thank you for the opportunity to tell this very UU story and for joining me now in celebrating nursing and nurses just before National Nurses Week. And Florence Nightingale is where we will begin, as the written history of my profession begins with her book, Notes on Nursing, What It Is and What It Is Not. Florence was the daughter of a wealthy landowner. He was a Unitarian and involved in the anti-slavery movement. He had no sons, so he chose Florence out of all of his daughters to be his child he would educate as one. He taught her Greek, Latin, French, French, Italian, and German, and history, philosophy, and mathematics. Florence's mother, who also came from a staunch Unitarian family, I find the phrase positively scary, had a primary concern, her mother, of finding her daughter a good husband. Fortunately for all of us, she was never successful. At age 17, Florence felt herself to be called by God to some unnamed great cause. At age 25, she told her parents she wanted to become a nurse. Her parents were totally opposed to this idea, as nursing was associated with working class women at best. In fact, working women in the broadest sense was a part of the history of nursing. At 31, nonetheless, Florence set off for Kaiserwerth, Germany, where she studied to become a nurse. And she returned to London to work as the lady superintendent of a hospital for invalid women. When I first read it, I wasn't sure if it was invalid women or invalid. In 1953, Russia invaded Turkey, and Britain and France, concerned about the growing power of Russia, wow, how history repeats itself, went to Turkey's aid in what came to be known as the Crimean War. How many people associated in their minds hearing, oh, the Crimea, just recently, with, oh yeah, what do I know about that? Florence Nightingale. At least that was my association. Within weeks of soldiers' arrival in the Crimea, an estimated 8,000 men had become ill with cholera and malaria. While there was considerable prejudice against women's involvement in medicine, or should we say pretty much anything, the public outcry about the number of deaths from illness, not war wounds, gave Florence an opportunity to take a group of 38 nurses to the Crimea. What she found there was appalling. The soldiers were often two in a bed, in cramped, filthy quarters with inadequate food, no hygiene, no heat, no sanitation, and inadequate care. 1 in 6 deaths was from war wounds, but additional diseases such as typhus and dysentery, along with the cholera and the malaria, were the main causes of death among soldiers of the British Army. Her work there included what would now be called scientific observations of public health. She saw and acted on such simple ideas as this. When a soldier was placed on the same straw mattress as a soldier who had died there, the next soldier got the same disease or infections in his wound. Florence had the straw changed, and the infection rate went down. It sounds simple to all of us in this day, but it was revolutionary thinking in that day, and from a woman, a nurse. I had the pleasure of visiting the Nursing History Collection at Boston University Library. There I saw a letter written, obviously in Florence's handwriting, to her influential friends back in England, berating them for sending chocolates to the soldiers. In characteristic, forthright Florence terms, she stated, "What these men is not chocolates. These men need clean, dry socks." I found it refreshing and a proud glimpse into the real Florence, who was best remembered in the literature as that very quiet, gentle lady with the lamp, who was viewed only as a ministering angel, making her solitary rounds with a little lamp in her hand, end quote, to the sick and wounded. When Florence returned to England in 1859, she wrote Notes on Nursing. The science of nursing practice in her time was revolutionary. Florence knew that the work of a nurse was to put the body in the best possible condition for nature to act on it. That meant fresh air, clean water, good food, hygiene, rest and quiet, and having a person educated on how best to do that. Because you'll remember, there were no antibiotics until the World War II, and there were not many things known about the science of disease. So it was, we need to figure out what can we do to put nature to work in the best possible way. Much of modern medicine would be wise to think on that again. With money from her wealthy friends in 1860, Florence founded the Nightingale School and Home for Nurses at St. Thomas Hospital. This began the tradition of students of nursing going for training at a hospital-based place of learning by working directly with patients. It is a little-known fact to you who had different education than I did, that at a diploma school of nursing, you were virtually slave labor. We worked on the floor, all the shifts, every other weekend, and we learned by doing. In middle of my nursing years, I was the most senior person at age 19 on an entire floor of 31 people on the night shift. And there was a real nurse, okay, as in an RN, who came over and she said to me, "Now, Nancy, there's a patient in the end room, okay, nowhere near the nurse's station, and they're on a heart monitor." And I quickly said to her, I've never even seen one. I haven't had cardiac nursing yet. I don't know anything about it. She said, "Come with me, dear." We walk in the room, and here's this little print. There were no cardiac care units. Me and Florence, remember, we went to school together. And here's this little thing going blip, 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 okay? And she says, you see that? Well, I'm staring at this thing as if my life depended on it. I felt like it did. And she goes, if you see anything different, you call me. This was in 1970. So she started this training school for nurses, but she was also involved in women's rights. Her book, Suggestions for Thought to Searchers After Religious Truths, cool title, argued strongly for the removal of restrictions that prevented women from having careers. When Florence returned to England, it was expected that she would return to the daily routine of the gentlewomen of her day, daily socializing over tea and needlework. Instead, Florence railed against this and wrote a book called Cassandra. And I have a copy in the other room of both Notes on Nursing and Cassandra for you to enjoy. It was an angry outburst against the forced idleness of Victorian women. It was a bold statement of protest against the waste of women's energies and talents. She wrote in it, quote, widowhood, ill health, or want of bread. These three explanations or excuses are supposedly to justify a woman in taking up an occupation. In some case, no doubt, an indomitable force of character will suffice without any of these three, but such are rare. Yeah, right. To avoid an idle life, Florence took to her bed as sick, where she worked for years on various projects from the army and the government, because to be well would have meant to sit downstairs and have tea and do fancy work. To be sick, she was allowed to stay up in her room in the solitude of her brain, and from there, she took on various projects, such as designing the entire way that sewage would be handled in India from a public health perspective. And various officials and dignitaries would come and sit at her bedside to consult with her on various matters of health and illness. If Florence were well, she would have been required to simply sit downstairs with the idle upper-class women of her day. Florence, I thank you for making the way clear for the profession of nursing to emerge. Well, on this side of the pond, a different but in many ways parallel universe of nursing was also emerging in the life of Clara Barton, who you heard about in song. Clara was born a year and a half after Florence, on December 25th, something we all could celebrate, 1821 in Massachusetts. Her father was prominent in the local Universalist church. Her mother was, quote, emotionally unbalanced and with sudden fits of rage. Her older sister, who had initially raised her because of her mother's illness, eventually had a mental breakdown, and she too, when Clara was young, was locked away upstairs after her mental breakdown. Clara's brother was seriously injured, and it became Clara's job at age 11 for the next 2 years of her life to nurse him back to health. It is not uncommon, incidentally, for nurses to have had early trauma in our lives, to become that parentified child, to take over responsibilities in families way beyond our years. At age 30, Clara, who had become a teacher, opened a public school in Bordentown, New Jersey. She left that job over her pay being less than the man who was brought in to run the school. And when she left, she went to Washington to become the first woman clerk in the patent office. This career was interrupted, much to my pleasure, by the Civil War. A week after Fort Sumter was fired on, wounded soldiers returned to Washington. Clara took the most seriously wounded to her sister's house and nursed them. She used her considerable network of contacts to begin to get supplies and set up places for care of soldiers. She lobbied legislators for better supplies and improved conditions in the field hospitals. But she felt her place was on the battlefield, writing, I quote, I may be compelled to face danger, but never fear it. And while our soldiers can stand and fight, I can stand and feed and nurse them. Military officials, even in this country, resented the presence of women in charge of any aspect of the battlefield. Her colleague, Dorothea Dix, another famous UU woman and nurse, and from New Jersey. But that's for another day. She also led nurses in battlefield nursing. Clara, like Florence in England, was also in support of women's rights. She wrote of the women's suffrage movement, quote, "I most devoutly wish that intellect, education, and moral worth decided a voter's privilege, and not sex or money or land or any other unintelligent principle." She spoke before veterans groups saying, "Soldiers, God only knows that women were your friends in times of peril, and you should be theirs now." But the women's suffrage movement was never her main priority. From 1870, her heart was in the Red Cross movement, as you heard about in the song. The Geneva Convention had established the International Red Cross, and Clara offered her services. She set up aid centers in several war-torn cities during the Franco-Prussian War. And when she returned to the United States, over the next 2 decades, she made the presence of the American Red Cross felt in such emergencies as the Johnstown's flood, multiple hurricanes, and outbreaks of typhoid and yellow fever in the United States. Late in life, Clara became keenly interested in spiritualism. She claimed, and this may be my favorite quote of the morning, she was not, quote, "what the world denominated a church woman," end quote. Many of us in this room may share that view. In 1905, she affirmed her Universalist faith in a letter, and she stated, "I am a Universalist, a belief in which all who are privileged to possess it rejoice. A belief in which all who are privileged to possess it rejoice." How privileged I am to be a Unitarian Universalist, a woman, and a professional nurse. It is a great honor to share these great UU women and nurses with you, as truly they were, as this year's Nurses Week theme states, nurses leading the way. It is my hope that sometime this week you will take time to reflect on how your life has been changed by the presence of nurses. Given the opportunity, I hope that you will too thank a nurse. Now, the show and tell portion of this presentation after the sermon is on the table inside when we go in for coffee are a bunch of things. Johnson & Johnson, a New Jersey-based company, has a huge thing called Campaign for Nurses. And so I sent for some of their materials, including coloring books for the kids about the career of nursing, and some posters and some things that you might enjoy looking at about the various roles of nurses. And that was why I had Cheryl read some of what just me in one career have been able to do. You will note that the posters are multicultural and gender inclusive. There are explanations on the table of various roles for nurses, and you'll see the kids have done hopefully some coloring for us as well. Also on the table is the actual little lamp that when I was pinned as a nurse, it was not like you got some guy's fraternity pin, it was pinned as a nurse, okay? And it was a big deal, and this is the pin. Lankenau Hospital was called, up until World War II, the German Hospital, not a particularly popular name after a while, so they changed it to be named after the gentleman John D. Lankenau, but the German cross persisted as the symbol of our hospital. And then when I got my bachelor's, I got this little piece, then the Honor Society for Nursing, and then one day a patient gave me this pin, and of course my UU pin and my rotary is also how I nurse, how I provide and use my skill set beyond just what I do to make a living. So I hope you'll enjoy those things, particularly the music by Country Joe McDonald. The CD, Thank a Nurse, as Linda said, was his inspiration to honor the profession of nursing, and I thought that was pretty cool. So hopefully you'll join us for coffee and see the sort of things I set up and take a look at that.